So I'm going to go ahead and get this amazing panel session started. And before I do that, I would like to thank NESG for the opportunity for us to have what I believe is a very timely conversation around how we can engage with the diaspora in helping to drive economic development in Nigeria and on the continent, I think on a broader scale. So my name is Tosindra Otoye, and I am the CEO of Conciliar Advisory Practice, as well as the founder of the Bloom Africa, which is an initiative that promotes gender equity and support for ambitious African women. So it is my pleasure to be here with you today, and I'll be serving as your moderator. And before I introduce our speakers, I just want to make sure that I set the stage for what we'll be talking about today. So actually last year, I submitted a policy paper that talked about the role of the diaspora in the development of Africa as well as Nigeria. And so before starting, I wanted to set the stage by sharing some of the information that I think will be pertinent to the conversation that we're about to have today, to this dialogue. And so according to the Brookings Institute, Africa's diaspora is comprised of about 30 million people. Okay, about 8.2 million of those live in Europe and 2 million live in the Americas. Transatlantic slave trade alone, because we must consider that as well when we talk about the diaspora, is a segment of the global, slave trade that took place from the many shores of our African countries. And that alone transported between 10 million and 12 million enslaved Africans across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas. And this was from the 16th to the 18th century. So when we talk about the loss of human capital, we can start to see in these numbers kind of what that looks like and the implications of what, that has been in our economic development. By the 80s, more than 30% of Africa's highly skilled workers had departed its shores. And so that's problematic. I know that as of March 2018, and this was the closest estimate that I could get, but I'm certain that those numbers may look different now. But as of March 2018, Nigerians accounted for the majority of pending asylum cases in Canada with over 11,000 pending claims. And so we know that people are making their way out of Nigeria and into Canada and other such, grass is greener type of destinations. Another interesting thing that I want to share is that 2,000 doctors have left Nigeria for the West in the past 2 years alone. This is very critical when we realize that there's only one doctor for every 5,000 people here in Nigeria. So that's something that we can talk about today. Only 20,000 scientists and engineers in Africa are serving the continent's population of about 1 billion people. That's definitely not enough. Lastly, according to the African Diaspora Policy Center, it costs the African continent nearly $4 billion to recruit non-Africans to fill the roles vacated by skilled and educated Africans. And so as I set this stage, I know a lot of what I've discussed has to do with who would call the middle class skilled and educated, but we also know that we have quite a significant number of Nigerians and Africans in the diaspora that are working class, folks that are working and either working in blue collar jobs, as we call them. And so how do we engage with them as well to develop the diaspora? And so having set the stage so that we know what the conversation is about today, and I've given you some numbers to hold on to, I'll then go ahead and introduce all of our panelists actually, and it is my pleasure to do so. And so we have Fakria Hashim with us today, who is a social and community development advocate in Nigeria. She's currently the team lead for Mayafi initiative, where she is working to improve response mechanisms to gender-based violence across Nigeria. She's led advocacy campaigns like Arawa Me Too, which drew inspiration from the Me Too global movement, as well as North Normal to drive public discourse on gender-based violence. She has been featured on multiple local and international media outlets as a social and political commentator, and she has worked with multiple NGOs and development agencies such as Girl Child Concerns in the conflict-ridden Borno states in multiple SDGs. Most recently, she also was a key role player in the mobilization of an organization called FEMCO. We also have Feyi Fawahimi with us today. He's an accountant and has worked in the UK's financial services for the past 10 years. His experience covers investment banking, private equity, asset management, and insurance. He's a co-author of Formation, The Making of Nigeria from Jihad to Amalgamation. He blogs regularly on Nigerian and economic policies and is also an amateur photographer. And so we're happy to have him as well. We also have Juliet Kego with us today. She is a poetess, which I love that description, and the co-founder of Whole Woman Network, a leadership, empowerment, and advocacy social enterprise for African women and youths. She's trained as an electrical engineer and as a leadership consultant. Her consulting services cut across government agencies, corporations, individuals, and NGO. Lastly, we will be joined by Dr. Akolisa Ifodike, who is an assistant professor in the School of Administrative Studies and the School of Public Policy at York University, Canada. His research includes areas such as accountability, public-private partnerships, and actor networks. He writes regularly about equity, diversity, inclusion, and civic engagement. He's also the chair of the National Council of the Association of Black Conservatives. So it is my pleasure to bring all of these amazing panelists together today to talk about how we can engage the diaspora in order to drive economic development forward here in Nigeria and beyond. And so I'm now going to turn to the panelists, and I'm actually going to start with Fakria in asking her to give us some thoughts on how we can engage the diaspora in moving Nigeria forward. This is actually very interesting and timely because as someone who, was engaged with the NSARS movement, I think that this was a learning opportunity for many of us. And we walked away with some key, I would say, learnings and opportunities. And so I would like to turn to Fakria now for her to discuss some of the way forward that she has learned along the way. So Fakria, over to you.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the introduction, Tosin. Um, I believe we have never seen this level of engagement from the diaspora in very core social issues as we have seen over the past few weeks with NSAS. Um, there was a lot of synergy in reacting and responding to the NSAS protests, which I think we can definitely build upon, even as protests ended across Nigerian states. The diasporan community continued just beyond protests where most cities went into lockdown anyway, but also in engaging their own government to see what can be done through diplomatic means, and other ways of holding the Nigerian government accountable, or ensuring that they respond to the plight of protesters adequately. So I do believe this is something that has been unprecedented, and there is definitely so much that can be built upon those structures that now exist.
Fantastic, Fakria. So thank you for those thoughts about sort of how the diaspora really came to engage around the NSARS movement, which I believe, was interesting because as we know, there was also the Black Lives Matter movement that affected a lot of people of color back in America. And the question was, how are those on the continent engaging? So it's like a vice versa type of situation where, we don't get to necessarily say that this bridge is one way, it's a two-way street. And so I think in terms of trying to broaden this dialogue, I'm curious as to what you have seen that has worked in terms of how we are fighting social justice issues by using bridges between the diaspora and the continent, for example. So what have you seen that has worked?
In terms of response to, I mean, Nigeria's reaction to Black Lives Matter, um, I don't believe there was, that level of activity from Nigerians, as there was in terms of, the response we've seen with NSAS. And, and I think that has a lot to do with this, um, the ethnic dynamics in Nigeria. because we we don't necessarily we don't necessarily find we sorry yeah we don't necessarily see the Black Lives Matter as sort of a Nigerian struggle, and that can be seen through the lens of how the social cultural dynamics play out in Nigeria, as opposed to how we've seen the reaction from the NSAS protests. This was something that um, all of Nigerians could relate to, right? But Nigerians currently in Nigeria were not able to find that alignment as with NSAS with the Black Lives Matter. But I do believe how people came out for the NSAS might set a precedent on how we generally react to issues that affect not just Nigerians but Black Africans across the world.
Very good. Thank you so much for Korea. And I'll come back to you with questions later about how, like I said, again, just digging in a little bit deeper into sort of how and what we can use in trying to make sure that we build those bridges and that those bridges are sustainable and impactful. Because like you said, I think that there has been a trigger point here, a point where, I think there's an organic process that we've witnessed, which is that when BLM was happening, which is Black Lives Matter in the US, like you said, for Korea, a lot of us here in Nigeria couldn't relate. We didn't see it as something that we could align with. But then as 2020 would have it, then afterwards, of course, we then had SARS, which then obviously raised the political consciousness of the youth. And all of a sudden now, they're starting to understand sort of that the parallels between what they're fighting for and what Black Lives Matter was about, and so on and so forth. So I think those sort of realizations and connecting points are things that are going to start to drive us, hopefully, towards more strategic conversation around how we build these bridges and how we ensure that these bridges are not only sustainable, but also impactful. So I'll circle back with you for Korea on that point as to how we can make that happen. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and bounce over to Faye. And Faye, I would love to talk to you because I know that one of the areas that you're quite passionate about is around this topic of remittances. And I think that that is a huge topic of discussion here when we talk about the diaspora and building the bridges to drive forward economic development. And so I'm going to turn over to you now, Faye, to ask you that what are you seeing? What are some of the sort of opportunities as well as some of the threats, perhaps weaknesses in the system around how we are using or harnessing or leveraging the remittances in order to drive forward economic development here in Nigeria and I guess on a broader scale, perhaps the African continent. So I'll pass it over to you now, Fee.
Thanks, Tosin. So I think the starting point would be that we should look at Nigeria at this point in time as a country in need of rebuilding. So the country has gone through quite a lot of stress in the last few years, not just even before the pandemic hit. Oil prices collapsed in 2014, and we've never, it's been 6 years now. The economy has taken a real beating. People who previously swore that they will never let go of fuel subsidy have now let go of it. Just gives you an idea of how bad things are. We're at a point in time where it is now. In 2017, we crossed a remarkable milestone in Nigeria where all revenues from oil could not pay just salaries alone. So that's how bad things have gotten. The government's finances are in a terrible mess. So, and then you have the whole the pandemic earlier this year was already had already done a number on the country. Then we had the NSAS protest, which the government then somehow managed to, as usual, botched the handling and even just the basic response to what protesters were asking for. And then, in the aftermath of that, we then had a whole situation where there was a breakdown of law and order and quite a a significant amount of damage was done across the country. So I think, but we could see, even in that, we could see what was top of mind of people. A lot of the looting ended up being for food, basic items. Again, we've just got a confirmation that the country is now in another recession again. So these things are, they paint a picture of a country that is badly in need of rebuilding. And there's a historical parallel I probably would like to use. So you had China in the 70s after Mao, after you had the violence of the Cultural Revolution, the trauma that the country had gone through. And then finally, when there was nothing else to do, the country decided, okay, we're going to open up economically. And one of the first, the first investor to invest in China. So we all know the story. China carved out a small part of the country in Shenzhen, saying, okay, we'll open up this part of the country, allow foreign investment in here, partly to give themselves the government deniability in the fact that if something went wrong, they could quickly shut it down and just say, oh, it was just something that happened in the coastal area. But the first investor to go in there was a company we now know today as CP Group, and they were Chinese immigrants. So these were Chinese immigrants who had left China about 50 years before, and the whole family had settled in Thailand. So they were the first ever foreign investor to enter into China. Today, they are the biggest, that CP Group, still based in Thailand, they're the biggest investor in China. They have about 200 different businesses in China. So we can see a story here about what the diaspora can do when harnessed, right? So in Nigeria's case, the conversation around the diaspora has pretty much, it's almost as if it's stuck around two things, remittances, which it's a big number. We get $21 billion. The number sounds good. We hear that all the time. Or Nigerians or people of Nigerian origin who are doing fantastic abroad. So lately, for example, a few days ago, we saw the NBA had about 8 Nigerians out of 60 people who were picked into the draft. 8 of them were either first or second generation Nigerians. So the conversation almost seems as if it is stuck in that gear, whereby that's all we're talking about. But there's more, there's more that can be done. Like I mentioned, you look at China, even Taiwan, which is a country next door, you can count them as the diaspora of China because these are people who fled there after the communist revolution. And Taiwan is the biggest source of foreign direct investment into China today. As a country, you have the Chinese in Malaysia. These people, they try out ideas in other countries. They build businesses, and they don't just send money back home. They bring back those ideas. So I think we are at the point where, the conversation around remittances, where I just send money to my dad or I send money to my cousins or family, it's good. It has reached the point. But now, at this particular point where Nigeria is now, the country needs rebuilding. It needs investment. Things have really broken down and things are bad, and it presents an opportunity. So I think the diaspora can really play a role here. But it's not just Nigeria that needs to get its act together. The diaspora as well needs to organize in better ways. So we could see, we saw with the NSAS movement, the diaspora was organized quite well and partnered with Nigerians in Nigeria. So I would like to see something like that, replicated across the investment space. So we just move things away from just individual people sending 100, 200 pounds or $1,000 or sending money to build, but to actually be able to organize, bring together not just the investment, but the know-how, the ideas and the talent, and make a big impact on the scale in Nigeria at this point in time when the country badly needs it. So I think that would be my opening statement, and that's what I'm hoping to see that we move to.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Freddie. That was really powerful sort of opening statement by you. And I think that, it's a very important thing that you're talking about, which is how do we move beyond just the, remittances that go to our family members, $200 here, $100 there, $300 there, and think about how to direct more of that, but in very strategic ways towards actual development projects. I know for a fact that in some states throughout Nigeria, we know of people who send home money to build houses, but a lot of times, they also fall victims to that money being used in other ways, and the home is not built. So at their community association, at their organizations, at their structured sort of social services delivery or any other type of delivery vehicle where folks in the diaspora can start to say, okay, if I really want to make an impact in my state or in my community, where do I put the money? How do I ensure that people have jobs or education or healthcare or all the other things that we so desperately need, as Faye said, in rebuilding our nation? And so how do we expand and broaden that conversation to include more impactful measures that can really help drive us on a larger scale? So I think that's what I heard, and I'm happy to, of course, revisit this with Faye as we go on throughout the dialogue. So now we are going to be moving on to our next speaker. And our next speaker is Ms. Juliet. And Juliet, I just wanted to find out from you sort of what your thoughts are as it relates to, the brain drain that I opened up our conversation with. And so in opening up the conversation with that brain drain and the numbers, it's like, how are we supposed to feel about, the fact that we have lost in a way so many of our human capital to other shores? And as Figgy brought up, it was very interesting in the sense that, he stated that there are things going on, like we look at the NBA, they bring out a list of Nigerians that have been drafted, and it's like significant and and impressive. And then you go to like, maybe medical schools and, places like Howard University, and they tell you that the majority of graduates are Nigerians. And so we're obviously thriving outside of our own borders, which shouldn't be the case. But how do we take this sort of thing that has happened already? We can't, it's happened, we've lost the human capital, but how do we sort of restructure the narrative or restructure the mechanics of this so that in a way we can use it to once again rebuild a bridge that can help drive investment as well as economic development here in Nigeria? And so I'll pass this question on to you at this moment. Okay, you're still on mute, I believe, so you'd like to unmute.
Yeah.
There you go. Thank you, Juliet. Yes.
All right. So, yeah. So and thanks a lot for that introduction and for setting the stage. Basically, I think there are two ways to look at brain drain, right? The one way is to see it as this negative thing that, obviously we're losing, this pool of human capital. And like, for instance, in the health sector, I know the average is like one doctor patient average is 1 to 5,000. That's the general average across the country, right? But if you were to even go specifically, like a state like Katsina, for instance, is 1 doctor to 55,000 citizens, right? So that paints, it's a gloomy picture if you really think about it. But on the other hand, right, there's a need to reframe that narrative. To reframe it into something positive. And what I mean by that is, even though we're having brain drain, right? And it's not just Nigeria, across the African continent. If we're to find solutions to this, we have to reframe it into a positive, where we're saying, who has this worked for? So we look around, the globe to say, which countries have been able to reverse this in a way that it then added value to them. And for that, there are a couple of countries. Israel is one of them, China, even India with health, tourism, and the ICT sector, right? It was all the immigrants that left, established themselves, really excelled, that eventually came back to set up global best practices in different sectors. If you look at a country like Taiwan, for instance, I think that's one country that I really followed closely, because I think Nigeria can learn a lot from what they're doing. Basically, Taiwan had the brain drain issue, right? But they started off with an intentional strategy of engaging with all the people that were leaving. So that there was that connection. So they knew people were leaving, but they made sure to connect with them, to be in touch with them, to engage them, get feedback from them as they were thriving. So people didn't just leave and say, you know, they lived abroad for like 20 years and, you know, totally disconnected. The government found a way to listen to them, to get feedback, and then started creating the environment that would attract them back. So what you're seeing in Taiwan now is a lot of the, you know, the people that emigrated out are now coming back. You know, they set up special parks for them, the infrastructure that they needed. They started out with, you know, skills transfer. We saw that even in India. Mauritius is another place where they started out with high remittances, just like Nigeria, right? But they shifted that. Eventually, they pulled funds together and created investment vehicles, right, that were structured, had great good governance, you know, backing it, and had, you know, competent people to run those investment vehicles. And they used that to then invest in the country as a collective. So the point is, for Nigeria, right, we have people sending, like you rightly mentioned, the individual remittances, you know, $100 here, $1,000 there, and it goes to for personal needs. But there's a new conversation that's emerging now, and I think the NSAS really consolidates that, where people are beginning to come together in groups. Like for instance, there's a professional women's network, Black women, that I'm a part of, right? What we're doing is we get together in groups, and then we're investing in cooperatives, women in the agro space, in the rural areas all across Africa. So that then is not the usual remittance, you know, that you're sending home. You're actually changing, you know, an ecosystem. And I like that Sheyi mentioned, Faye mentioned the NBA draft. Someone like Masai Ujiri, right? Who's, I mean, did such a phenomenal job with the Toronto Raptors. He's been able to create something that I think a lot of Nigerians in diaspora can learn from. He comes home every summer for the past, I think, 14, 15 years. And he's building this, it's like an academy, right? The Giants of Africa, it's an NBA, you know, like a program, a leadership program, all across the continent, in different countries in Africa, a new generation of players that are not necessarily just going to end up, you know, in the NBA circuit, but homegrown in Africa. So there's so many people like that now that are doing things, whether in STEM, in the wash sector, in education. So people are changing that narrative, and I really want us to go away kind of like with that thought that even though brain drain seems like a negative, it's in our hands to change it, to make it something, because the world is borderless, right? So it's in our hands to change the conversation into something that builds value for Nigeria in the long run.
Fantastic, fantastic. That was such a great opening remark by Juliet. I really found that to be powerful, because I do think and I believe strongly that this is the time for us to begin to reframe what brain drain means to us here in Nigeria and the continent as a whole, because like she rightly said, it's in our hands to change this narrative. It is in our hands to decide how we want to leverage what has already taken place to the benefit of our country and to the development of our country. And I love several of the examples that were offered. You know, someone in the NBA coming back to build an academy. You know, that goes beyond, like we talked about, those individual remittances that go to family members, $100 here, $1,000 there, that is quickly spent. Not to say that that's not necessary as well, but how do we start to expand and broaden our conversation and our thinking around what needs to happen to scale this type of activity, right? And so everything from how we impact education here, how we impact healthcare, like I said earlier, and so on and so forth. And so I think, one of the things that I love to say all the time is we must dedicate and commit ourselves to finding African solutions to African problems. So oftentimes we don't have the luxury of copying and pasting solutions to this terrain because it's a very unique terrain. But what can we learn from what's working in other places? And then how can we find a way to tailor that and engage in groups to ensure that we can drive that forward? Now, what I want to do is I want to kind of go back over to Fakria, because I think this is a very interesting sort of angle for us to then start to move towards, which is this angle of how do we begin to work in groups or to do things in a strategic manner to drive forward economic development. So, for example, we know about Ghana and the year of return and how they have done a really strategic job. If anybody's not, familiar with this, but the country of Ghana in the past 2 years has gone through a very strategic, I would say, plan, marketing, PR, all of those stuff involved to bring in folks from the diaspora every December to spend time in Ghana. They're giving citizenship. They're giving opportunities to invest and buy land. They're giving you opportunities to have a chieftaincy title or so on and so forth. And so those are some of the things that we're seeing taking place in Ghana. And I think when we talk about how we also not only drive economic development, but also social development, I would love for Korea to take this on and give us her thoughts around that and sort of how we can take what's happening in Ghana and see what we can do with that here in Nigeria. So over to you, for Korea.
Thank you. I think that the Ghanaian parallel is a very interesting example, and I do believe we've already sort of replicated that. I believe they called it the door of return. But you see, the thing with our own replication or duplicity of what the Ghanaians are doing is that we haven't, the government especially has not done the prerequisite work of ensuring the security of lives and investments. This is because uh, normally every December the Nigerian diaspora goes back home, has a good time, spends a lot of money. um, so many things happen in that period of time. um, but given the context of things now, not many people are gonna return to return to Nigeria in December this year, because there's that fear of people's lives and the security of things. And this is especially important to see how government's response to certain things affect affects every aspect of the Nigerian relationship with with the diaspora in the long term, because there's this further erosion of public trust and even the diasporan trust in their safety in Nigeria. They would rather go to be part of Ghana's year of return and all of those initiatives that the government is their government is putting in place than it would in Nigeria, because they've seen how they've seen our lack of sanctifying of lives, and no one would want to be caught up in that crossroad. So it's critical that we understand response to one event trickles down and affects everything, not just people coming back, but people are also uh, people are also thinking about their investments and that security of that. So I think it's very key that whatever initiatives and whatever government plans, or what manner it responds to things, it needs to think about the long-term effects of what we do, because this is without a doubt going to have a long-term impact in this synergy that that Nigeria is trying to create with its own diaspora.
Mhm. Very good. Thank you so much for Kriya for that very thoughtful response. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that, as someone who enjoys to travel a lot, and I've invited, folks to come visit and all of that. And oftentimes the frustration begins when you start to apply for the visa and all the different hoops you have to jump through. And then even if you think you're going to do visa on arrival, there are hoops to jump through there too. So a lot of times, the ease of visiting or the ease of making sure that or feeling confident in the fact that your investments are secure is just not something that we have quite gotten a grasp on here in this space in Nigeria. And so you're right to point that out is that Ghana has the kind of success they have because their government is also taking key steps to ensure that people that are coming for the year of the return feel safe, their security is top notch. They also ensure that investments are also kept safe and so on and so forth. So I kind of want to bounce this now to Faye because I know that Faye has started talking about how we need to start thinking about building Nigeria back up. So, infrastructurally, I mean, I would even venture to say mindset wise, there's so many things, governance, there's so many things that we just need to address here in our nation. But as Fakria has pointed out, there are concerns just around sort of government engagement where that is concerned and whether or not the necessary steps are being taken, if the needful is being done to ensure that we are preparing for the engagement with the diaspora. Because again, like Fakria said, there's distrust internally here within the state, but then there's also distrust outside where folks on the outside are thinking, how do I know who to trust? And it's unfortunate, but it's the truth. And so I would like to bounce that over to you, Faye, to see what your thoughts are on that dilemma that we're facing.
Well, I mean, it's definitely a dilemma. The Nigerian government. I mean, it's just the reality of Nigeria that the Nigerian government may not be able to help you, but they can definitely do you damage. So if you are bringing in some money to invest into Nigeria, the government might not be able to provide you the infrastructure or the safety of your investment, but they could turn on you in such a way whereby you lose everything. So the government has a lot of negative power, if you like. In fact, you might almost say all its power is negative. So it's a question of, how do you then square that circle? How do you get into the point whereby, I mean, nobody wants to lose money, whatever money you're going to invest in Nigeria is hard earned. So how do you square that circle? I think the challenges are that, first of all, you have to bring yourself or to be quite familiar as much as possible with where the government, not just what the regulation is, but the noises that the government is making in terms of what it thinks are priorities and what it thinks are the areas that it wants to support. Unfortunately, there might not be areas that you think are the best areas to focus on, or they might not be the areas where you think you have an interest. But it is, I think, the first thing to do to safeguard investment when you're dealing with a government that has a lot of negative power is to just make sure that, to use the Nigerian word, quote unquote, you're aligned. What is the government's focus? What are they trying to drive? What is the area that they're trying to push things in? And then, get yourself as familiar with what the law is, because in a country like Nigeria, they can always bring something up on you. There are dormant sleeper clauses and all that kind of stuff in regulation, whereby until maybe you annoy someone or maybe someone just decides to punish you, that's when they activate those things. So I think the first thing, and to use in the current situation that Nigeria is now, the government makes a lot of noise about agriculture. I personally don't really like the approach that they take to agriculture, because Nigeria continues to use agriculture as disguise for unemployment. So we already have 60% of the population working in agriculture, but then the government keeps saying, oh, more people should go to the farm, go to the farm. As if, you start to wonder that what percentage would be good enough for people? Do you want 80% of Nigerians working on the farm? Or, what exactly are we trying to achieve when productivity is already so low that throwing more people at it is just going to make it worse? But there are other areas. So things like, we have challenges with processing. Our agriculture is still very basic. So we have challenges around, how to, even if you just take an approach of say, you know what, I want to go into Nigeria today, looking at what the country produces, and I want to build a business around eliminating waste. You'll be amazed at what you can achieve with palm oil. There is a huge amount of waste that goes on there, or even tomatoes or onions, anything you produce in Nigeria, we have so much waste. Yams, if you take an approach that, look, I go in there and I want to just reduce the waste by 20% and build a sustainable business around it, you will find, and that puts you in line with what the government wants to achieve and what they are encouraging as a station. So I think that's just one example. But the fundamental thing is, to just make sure you do your research as much as possible, and make sure that you're not going in a direction that is almost as if you are that as much as possible you don't run up against. Again, you always have to remember the government has a lot of negative power. They might not be able to help you, but they can damage you. So you want as much as possible to be in line with what they're encouraging, what they're promoting, the noises they're making, and then see where you can add value in that area. So I
So
mean,
that's why I
a
said you
lot
should
of
help. I think, because I always do this. Yeah. Oh,
yeah. So I mean, just to wrap up, I think that would be generally my view. Just make sure that your research and your knowledge of what the government is saying, bring yourself in line with that, and you will find areas where you can add value. It might not be exactly what you want to do, but you should often sometimes also allow the market and the demand, or what the economy is saying, to guide you in the direction that you should go.
all right. You can start the video. Okay, Faye, thank you so much for those thoughtful remarks once again. I think what you're touching on here and what I'm hearing, and you can, of course, correct me, is just, again, what I stated at the very beginning of this conversation and this dialogue, is that we must find African solutions to African problems. Like you said, in the case of Nigeria, you have to consider the role that the government plays when we talk about strategies and we talk about long-term vision, because like you pointed out, Faye, there are times when laws and regulations that have been dormant for God knows how long, and then all of a sudden you annoy the wrong person or you anger the wrong person, and all of a sudden now you're in trouble. So in a way, you have to learn how to navigate and maneuver this terrain, because it's a very unique one. And it's one whereby you have to find other ways to make impact that may not be quite the obvious opportunities that you might think of. So as you said, Faye, in terms of something like waste in agriculture, I know of a startup that just got a good amount of funding because they are going to turn tomato waste into tomato paste, and that's because they realized that a lot of tomatoes were just going bad because of transportation issues. They couldn't keep them cold. And so being able to understand that this is a problem, but then understanding also what the opportunity exists and what the opportunity exists within that is very important sort of insight that I think we need to start to explore, both as Nigerians, but also as those in the diaspora, is what are the opportunities that, even if we have governments that are a bit obstructive or stifling, or they hold us back in many ways, what can we still do with what's in our hands, like I often like to say. And so I think that's a very good point that you brought up. And so now I want to bounce over to Janet. And, I know that she talked about sort of her interest in the area of education. And so I really want to hear from you about sort of, based on what Faye has said about the challenges. And I think Fakria also brought up some challenges. And so we're starting to see a theme rise up here around how there are lots of good ideas, but we have challenges, right? We have very unique obstacles, a lot of it perhaps governance related. So I want to turn over to you to ask you what your thoughts are around sort of other social development activities that we could be engaging in partnership or in bridge with the diaspora. And so I'll turn that question over to you now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thanks a lot, Tosin. I think with the government, the idea that we should navigate, the obstructions of the government that we have, I am very, I'm worried about that. I think what NSAS has shown us, right, is that we have a lot of power. And it's time to activate that power, especially Nigerians in the diaspora, right? We had Nigerians, writing to their MPs and requesting that what was happening in Nigeria should be probed. They brought it to, they made so much noise about it that, we saw the CNN coverage, the power of social media in coalescing, that advocacy. And I think that NSAS is symbolic. Everything around it is symbolic about how government has always treated Nigerians with contempt, with zero regard for life, for the sanctity of life, like Fakriya had mentioned. And if we don't agree on the value of a Nigerian life, there's no nation, because then there's no one to govern. So I think that the beginning of the conversation, even how we engage, right, in terms of education, in terms of all the different interventions we do in STEM, in WASH, everything is geared towards one thing, which is leadership and active citizenship. Because for us, we recognize that if we don't change the trajectory of leadership in Nigeria, Nigeria will implode. Like the North already, like this morning, I think at a prayer site, in Zamfara, an imam was kidnapped, I think with 40 other people. 4 people were killed just today. And we hear stories like that every day. 12 assistant police officers, kidnapped by bandits. Every day is a different story. And then you segue to how the government has even clamped down on NSAS protesters, peaceful protesters, frozen their accounts, seized passports, arrested them indiscriminately. It shows that there's a breakdown of law and order. So for us, all the social intervention, everything that we're doing is saying, how do we get a better leadership? There's Professor, the late Professor Pius Adesomi, there was something he said that really resonates to this day. And it's that Nigerians must develop a contempt for mediocrity, for this culture of anyhowness. We must develop it, and then we must use, to me, the NSAS movement shows that it can be done. I work with so many different groups, NGOs, volunteer groups, and prior to October 20th, right, when the Lekki massacre happened, if you put out any question to say, will you die for Nigeria? The Nigerian youth that respond most of the time, they just say, no, never. This is not what I just want to leave. I want to go to Canada. I want to go to the UK. I want to, But after that day, something shifted. I put out that same question and people were saying, I'm ready to die for this country. It is worth saving. And these are young people. And for me, that is a huge shift in consciousness. That is people taking over, they're claiming their story. They're reclaiming the civic space. And they're saying we can hold these people accountable. And I think all intervention should be geared towards that. We must fix our politics so that every other thing can work. We can't keep maneuvering, navigating, trying to please. And I think for young people even, it's their future that we're destroying, right? And I love that they now have this fire to fight back. So for us, the interventions that we do around education, for instance, there's intervention in STEM, there's intervention that we're doing with WASH, because that's a barrier to education. So all of that, we make sure that at the heart of it, it is really to empower communities so that they're healthy, they're resilient, they're sustainable in such a way that we're creating wealth. So we use we don't use the NGO model because we believe Nigeria, you can't NGO your way out of the dysfunctional rot that we have in Nigeria. We can't even entrepreneur our way out of it. You know, so what we're saying is, instead of grants and all of that, it has to be holistic. It has to be about creating wealth. So we're investing in education in a way that creates wealth. Not the government is always saying go back to agri, but poverty is increasing, so it's not working. The way they're presenting agriculture, and I agree with Faye, that's not what we need. So we do intervention. For instance, there's a volunteer relationship that we have with an organization in Canada, Accept, and they're running this volunteer program with schools in Nigeria, teaching them about agrophonics, you know, how to do sack farming in urban areas, how to, you know, sustainable wealth creation through waste management. So a different way of creating wealth. Digital skills, a lot of things that we also do. STEM training. And for STEM training, it's not this, the way the government is approaching it is like, it's for photo ops. They come to Silicon Valley, take these lovely pictures, and that's it. But you go around the school, we curate pictures of public schools in Nigeria, and even animals cannot stay in some of them. So the way that I think that the diaspora can really create a lot of shifts is to partner with organizations that are already on ground in Nigeria. Accountability organizations, organizations that are doing advocacy in education, in STEM, in WASH, you know, in good governance, and there are lots of them. Budget, Enough is Enough, Edu Planner, Tracker, Connected Development, solid organizations that are on ground. The NESG, right, being that bridge between the public sector and the private sector and the CSOs can play a lot of roles in creating the right environment for the diaspora to engage in such a way that people begin to become active citizens, because we must change the quality of leadership. This is not good enough. We must change it. And for us to change it, people have to be empowered to be able to vote for the right person and not, you know, receive the bribes that the politicians give them. So all our education is geared towards giving people skills, and then from there changing the mindset, so that, you know, we're voting better leaders and we're asking for the reforms that need to happen. Electoral reforms, judicial reforms, around accountability and corruption, police reform, which NSAS was about, and we've seen how the government is handling it. This is not the government that is going to reform the police for us. So we have to start really working towards how do we elect the right people to give us the country that we need.
Absolutely. I mean, you bring up a really good point here. Thank you, Janet. You bring up a really good point here. And this is a point that I think we have to address. And I see that we have been joined by Dr. Akolisa. So welcome to the panel with us, talking about how to engage the diaspora. And what I loved about your comments, and I'll just pull out a couple of things, key things here that I want the panelists to react to. So this is going to be a question for all. Because I think governance is something that's a bit of a pink elephant in the room. I call it not just an elephant, but a bright pink one, because it's there, you can't ignore it. And so now we're there, we're touching on it, right? So I made a comment earlier about how we have to navigate the terrain. And Janet's response was, you know, we're tired of navigating this terrain. We need to start empowering ourselves and making, you know, really honest demands about what we want in terms of governance. And I hear her loud and clearly. As someone who has occupied spaces in both the diaspora and Nigeria most recently, I can tell you that, you know, I also oftentimes, I went to a school of public service. I've always been in service and, sort of like activism, community development, mobilization, and organization, and also community development. And what I'll say is that one of the things that is very unique about our landscape here is that we have to just, in a way, also be very realistic about the government that we are engaging with. And so that's what we've realized with the NSARS movement, is that it was a rebellion, right? And we know there's a difference between a rebellion and a revolution. So what we're talking about now is more about how do we direct ourselves towards more structured governance, dialogue, execution, actionable items that can help to start to reshape governance in Nigeria, which is, I might add, a quite hefty task. But having said that, I think, the point that I was trying to drive, and I want to hear from those in the panel, is that in this terrain, we have to be mindful of the actors that we are engaging with. And these actors, as they've shown us time and time and again, certain actions are not out of the picture. So, for example, what happened at the Lekki toll gate is an example. But as you mentioned as well, Janet, like, we've had hundreds of people that are being killed almost weekly in the North. Even when we talked about the End SARS movement, the question I was asking is, does the North want to end SARS, or are they using them as a form of protection? These are some of the conversations we need to start having around what it's really going to take for us to see the realistic outcomes and what does success look like. So we're not the West, we're not Ghana. We have a lot to deal with and a lot to really dig up and address here. And so what does success start to look like for us in terms of the small steps that we can take forward? Because as much as we would love to revolutionize everything about our country, the truth of the matter is that it's taken us several generations to get to where we are now. And so education is one good starting point, but I'm sure that there are others that we need to talk about. But that's why I mentioned earlier this idea of mindset, which is what Janet referred to, is we have to ultimately start to address the mindset issues so that people can start to pick better governance and better officials to bring them I guess the change that they want to see. But how do we get there? And that's the kind of slow and painful work that we need to do. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pass it on now to the panel to say, what do you want to talk about? And based on what we've just said, does anybody have any input for Kriya, Feyi? I know that Dr. Kalisa just joined us, so I'm happy to start with you if you have any immediate thoughts, or we can start with someone else. I'm just going to put that out there for discussion and dialogue about the reality of what we're facing, regardless of sort of the dreams that we have for our country. And we all have dreams for Nigeria, but what's the reality on the ground, and what can we do to start to make those small, and I think, the change we're going to see is going to be a collection of small changes. I think that NSARS was one, kind of inflection point. And so there might be other inflection points and they start to come together as one big inflection point. But what are the next steps that you guys see based on the reality that we are facing here in Nigeria? And even though we are in a recession, as was mentioned, it's also been mentioned that we still remain one of the strongest and most, we're still one of the most promising on the continent, believe it or not.
Great.
So
Well, thanks,
how do we
Kalisi.
sort of reconcile these things? Yeah. Yes, go ahead, Dr. Kalisa. Yes.
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to chime in if that's okay.
Okay.
I guess
Yes, that's
previous Julia, Dare, and yourself are both spot on that. Following, just kind of picking it up from NSARS, right? That was effective but unstructured, obviously, and that's not sort of diminishing the impact of what we saw over those 2 weeks. But as far as next steps, we'll have to move, find it within us to move to something that's just a little more structured and coordinated. Julia did touch upon the fact that, we have to operate within the confines of, the current systems and processes we've been given. And I'm sort of talking about another bright pink elephant, which is, the lack of political participation. When I compare, I'm calling in from Canada, obviously. The last election here, we had, close to 20 million voters, out of a population of 30 million. You look at the last US elections, close to 170 million people out of a population of 300 million. The last Nigerian election had, just about 36 million people vote in a country of close to 200 million people. So while, protests and revolutions and the likes of them have a certain appeal and might sound compelling and attractive, especially in a universe of we want it and we want it right now. The reality is that we have to find ways to move from protest to policy, and that starts with political engagement. That starts with ensuring that we go out and vote. Civic engagement can mean 20 things, everything from going out and exercising your responsibility as a citizen, i.e. vote, to supporting candidates, going out there and being active, and supporting candidates could be with your time or your resources, time or money. In Nigeria, and I don't say this to take a jab at anyone, there's the idea that we take from politicians, not give to politicians. So until we accept that we're willing to write a check and give to politicians that we believe in, and that we're willing to support them with our time, if not our resources, that's really the sort of structured conversations we'll need to go to before, the 10 other things we'd like to see, could start to derive and cascade from that. The last thing I'll leave, you with at this point is, we've got, a country where, as of 2 years ago, diaspora remittances exceeded crude oil, right, as the largest source of foreign exchange revenues. Yet, the folks we have in diaspora do not have voting rights. Again, that's not going to happen accidentally. That's going to happen as a result of intentional, demands and activism that we go out there and ensure that, we're able to make the case and frankly, demand those rights from the institutions that exist. There was a discussion around political electoral reform in the last, 3 to 6 odd months. I do not recall any discussions in that mix related to diaspora voting rights. So ultimately, I think the reality is this. The last effort was somewhat uncoordinated. I think there's the mechanisms that exist for us to be a slightly more coordinated group. The diaspora, and it's a partnership with our brothers and sisters who live in country. But Karl Marx made that argument a long time ago, and we saw how that's been extremely beneficial to the Jewish nation, where they've leveraged the diaspora, the resources of the diaspora, for the ultimate development and benefit of the country. So it's not a competition, between those in diaspora and those back home. It's about coordination, and ultimately we have to find a way to harness, the energy and bring about change in the way that's meaningful and impactful.
Tosin, you're muted.
Thank you. So I just got unmuted. I hope you can hear me now. And so I love where the direction of this is going. Thank you, Doctor, because you are starting to now touch upon some policy reforms, which I think is a very critical part of this dialogue. Is when we are done sort of discussing the issues, we then have to talk about what some of the solutions are. And I loved what you said earlier, Doctor, about the fact that how you're right. How come we don't have an ability to ensure that those in the diaspora can vote? Is it, was it designed, to purpose, or is there a way that the diaspora can rise up and say, we are demanding this right that really should be given to us as citizens of our country to vote? I've voted absentee before, and it worked, straight to the US. I just mailed it in. It was a very simple process. But obviously, again, because there's so much distrust of the system, how do we hold the players that are active in this? How do we hold them to account and hold them accountable? But I love the fact that the doctor was talking about how we can start to move the dialogue towards actionable sort of policy and reform that we can use to drive that civic engagement in a way that will make us see the impact that we have to see. Because the truth is, you can't put lipstick on a pig, as they say, right? So if things are not good from the ground up, it's going to be hard for us to start to implement these ideas that we've seen elsewhere if our governance structure, our frameworks, and all of that is really shaky, or in some cases not existent. And so I'm going to now pass it over to Faye, and then we go to Fakria and then Janet, and then I'll close out with any final thoughts. But let's keep it short, like within maybe, I would say like maybe a minute or so, to kind of round up your thoughts and to give us some ideas and thoughts around what some policy areas are that you would like to see or recommend and put forth in terms of the areas that you're focused on in terms of your work. So I'll go ahead and pass that on, and I will let Fakria go first about any sort of policy changes or things that you think we need to do in order to ensure that we are able to have sustainable engagement with the diaspora.
Hi, yeah, thank you. So one of the things that I believe is sort of untapped is this social capital that the diaspora has. We've seen how that has sort of played out during the NSAS protests, and these are things that we can definitely leverage on to create more synergy and coordination. We tend to sort of dismiss the the number or the well the amount, or yeah, the cluster that of people that we have in Nigeria's middle class, and we tend to showcase most of them as being part of the diaspora. We've seen how they've been able to, engage people that they know back home. A lot of Nigerians in the diaspora are in touch with their own communities, and this is something that we can definitely leverage on to sort of activate that level of um, citizenry that we have in the country. So definitely leveraging on these structures that have been inspired and have been exasperated by the NSAS protests to further synergize and coordinate in fine tuning initiatives, but also influencing policy and policy making at different levels. So yeah, I mean, we've learned so much from the protests, especially how deeply involved the diasporans want to be. And it would be very critical to create systems where, even if they're not very formal, but having systems in place that would ensure that they're a critical part of the conversation, because there's so much that Nigerians can benefit from. Academia is definitely one. There isn't a very strong relationship between the academic Nigerians in the diaspora and the discourse that is happening within the country. And I've been lucky enough to meet a lot of them that have incredible initiatives out here. They're professors across Russell universities in the UK that are creating their own initiatives in Nigeria to go back during the summer to teach classes at several universities. So how do we? It's very important to explore how we can be able to strengthen some of the things that these critical stakeholders are working towards.
Thank you so much for Korea. I think that's a wonderful recommendation. And what I'm hearing, and I'll move to Faye next to talk about something more, maybe policy as well, because what I'm hearing and what I agree with, quite frankly, is that a lot of the work that needs to be done is going to be done amongst the citizens, amongst ourselves. We have to figure out a way to build the linkages and the bridges, and to, like Janet said earlier, collaborate, partner, and drive forward specific actionable or how to help people. I know someone, for example, that's starting a company where you can get out a mortgage, but through the UK, so you can buy property here. So that way, that investment to a degree is protected, right? So we have these kinds of ideas that are coming up, but again, it's happening amongst the citizenry or the populace and not necessarily being driven by the government. So I'm going to turn to Faye now and say, Faye, in terms of remittances or the areas that you're passionate about, what are some of the policy changes or reforms that you would like to see in terms of how we can build this bridge in a way that's sustainable and impactful?
Well, thanks. So, I mean, I
And
think
just
this
give us
is,
about a minute. Yeah.
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 So I think this is probably one of my pet areas that I always like to talk about, that, in terms of ideas, right? So what we are trafficking in is not just money, but also ideas. And I always say to people that if you live out in the West, if you live in America or the UK, a lot of the problems plaguing Nigeria today was solved in the 19th century or the very early 20th century. So if you live in America, for example, as a rough rule of thumb, I would say Nigeria is probably around 1905 America. So we should always know, I mean, for us in the diaspora, we owe it to ourselves to not just always think that the answers to the questions that we're looking for Nigeria are in the here and now, but to do a bit more digging. So we have cholera problems that break out in Nigeria every time, every so often. These Boston used to have a serious cholera problem, and they solved it. How did they do it? These are the kind of questions that, or the US, for example, used to have a serious problem between where herdsmen and farmers always used to clash. And this went on for a long time until finally there were policy ideas that came around and solved up those problems. So all these problems that we see in Nigeria today, many of them have been solved, but it's just that they've been solved so long ago that you have to do a bit of digging to find out the answers to them. So I think, maybe a bit more curiosity.
Let me ask you this, Faye. What can the CBN do? Do you have any policies around the CBN? Because that's a question that came up, and I just wanted to make sure that you captured that in your closing statement as well.
Well, I mean, I think the CBN, obviously they have a tendency to want to tinker quite a bit. They are very obviously foreign exchange is almost the be all and end all of the CBN now. So yeah, there's always a kind of situation whereby they want to regulate how foreign exchange comes in or how it even leaves the country. But I think the CBN, one thing I would say is that they have to do it. They will be able to. They need to do is that we should accept the fact that if we're going to get investments to come into the country, then we must also make it possible for returns on investment to leave. So those are the things that will make it possible and easier for us to attract investment. If you are only making it easy for investment to come in, people are always thinking about how do we get our investment out? Are we going to be able to get our investment out when we need to? And I think the CBN, if there's one area it can do, it needs to be able to signal that look, you can bring in your funding into Nigeria, but when you need to get your returns on investment to go, then we'll also make it as easy for you as possible. That alone will unlock a lot more investment. The fact that people realize that, look, you can come in and you can go out, and it makes a world of difference. Recently, we've had a lot of like foreign bondholders and others who have been stuck in Nigeria. They can't take their money out of the country. This is a challenge because there's somebody out there holding $1 billion in his hands thinking, where am I going to take this to? And then he sees a story about people who took money into Nigeria, they can't get the money out, and they say, I'm not going there. So we should also think about the amount of investment that is not coming in because we make this regime so difficult and so stringent that we discourage potential investment. So I think that would be the one area I will recommend. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Faye. And as we wrap up, I want to get our final thoughts from Janet, and then maybe just a closing sentence because we're really out of time by the good doctor that's here with us because we want to make sure we close out on time. And so, Janet, having heard sort of some of the recommendations, sorry, Juliet, I am so sorry, I apologize. It's a Monday. It happens on Monday. So deeply apologize for that. But yes, please share with us some of your thoughts, closing thoughts, give us about a minute or two about sort of the thoughts that have been shared around, governance issues, how we can start to engage in terms of our remittances and the government and CBN, and what we need to do to drive that collaboration and partnership. So I don't know if you have sort of a closing thought on this and a final word on sort of what you believe we need to do moving forward in terms of policy or reforms or mindset shifts that we need to employ to see the change we want to see.
Great, thank you. Quickly, I think overall, there is hope for Nigeria. That's for me, that's the message that I really want to leave with. Because we are 65% going on 70% youth demographic, right? So if we invest in our youth, if we invest in education, if we invest in technology, in STEM, in the creative industries, those sectors that the youth are driving and doing a good job of. Imagine if the government now creates policies that aid those sectors. Already the youth are doing phenomenal work there. So imagine if they have that support. Then we can address the issue of poverty because poverty remains the #1 existential threat in Nigeria. That's what, it's giving rise to a lot of the insecurity, that we have. poverty is being weaponized, and so we're voting in the wrong people because people are too poor. So for me, the closing thought is really, we have to invest in people. We have to invest in the institutions that will give us the leaders that we need. So electoral reforms, I'll keep coming back to this, judicial reforms, police reforms, those three things. And after that, we can go into a new constitution and, restructuring and all of that. But these three things, if we can do this between now and 2023, then it gives us an opportunity to get more people to vote. Because we keep saying Nigerians don't come out to vote. It's not that people don't want to vote. We talk with voters, the electorate a lot, and there's a lot of advocacy around that. But the thing is, when you vote and there's violence, you're not inclined to come again and vote. When you vote and you see that, ballot boxes are snatched away and there's no consequence, for that, then people are not enthused. The state that I come from, Anambra, the last election, only 25%, less than, even showed up. I traveled home to vote. I went from, because the people I was speaking with, the youth they said, you're far away in Canada, you don't want to participate, and you're telling us, and I came back because of that. But the thing again is that people don't trust the process. And so until we strengthen the institutions so that people trust, those institutions, we won't get more people participating. And finally, the final thing I want to say is for the diaspora community, there's a lot of work that we have to do, but there's also a lot of leverage that we have. Those remittances can be channeled, I said that before, in a structured way through funding vehicles that allow us to transform communities, that allow us to invest in education, in endowment in training teachers, in partnering with government so that government listens to us. When we do things in silos, we're not strong. But when we pull together, then we have a bargaining power, and then we can change things from the policy level. And I really love what the NESG is doing, and I hope they continue the conversation and, get the diaspora community involved, because we don't really trust the government anymore. So we'd want a channel like the NESG to be the arbiter. That's my final thought. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliet. This has been an amazing session and dialogue and panel. And, I have to close up now. And I appreciate Dr. Ekulisa joining us and offering his very insightful views as well. And in closing, and I would just like to say that what I walked away with and what I heard from a lot of our speakers today is the fact that a lot of what's going to drive Nigeria forward as far as the diaspora is concerned is going to be self-driven by the citizens themselves. And so the theme that came up was just that the reliance on government. So while we want to talk about reforms and policy changes, which some have been offered here, including things like how can Nigerians abroad vote, or, what can the CBN do? But we've also then agreed that in so many cases, the government doesn't necessarily work with the people. And so the people have to work with themselves. And that's what I'm hearing as a common theme and thread throughout the discussion that we've had is how do we tap into one another's or each other's strengths, each other's resources in order to leverage all of that so that we can drive forward the change we want to see in Nigeria, specifically around the issue of governance and educating people so that the mindset shift can start to occur. Because if those institutions are not trusted, if people don't feel as though they can engage and express their wishes or share their voices and cast their votes, then we're just going to remain stuck in so many ways. And that has to do with social development, economic development, educational development, healthcare, on and on it goes, right? So how do we get the citizens more engaged, more empowered? How do we elevate, engage, and educate them in a way that we start to see the impact that we need to see in Nigeria? And, in closing, I just want to say thank you, as was said earlier, to NESG for this amazing platform that they're giving us to talk about things that are very critical to our development. Thank you to all of the sponsors. And the good news is that the conversation doesn't actually end here. So if you would like to continue the conversation, you can continue with us at official NESG across all social media platforms. And we also are asking you to hashtag any conversation topics that you continue to have off of any of the sessions that you attend, and the hashtags there are hashtag NES26, as well as hashtag building partnerships, as well as hashtag building resilience. And so in closing, once again, I would love to thank the panelists today. Bakria, thank you for your time. Feyi, thank you for your time. Dr. Akulisa, thank you. And Mrs. Juliet Kegel, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time, your thought leadership, your suggestions and your recommendations. And it is our hope that we'll continue this dialogue so that we can continue to think about creative ways to really address the real pain points that we have here in our beloved country of Nigeria. So thank you all once again, and thank you for taking time to join us today. Have a lovely rest of the day. Bye-bye.